Welcome to the S.M.I.L.E-ing Boys Podcast. This is a podcast that explores a public health approach to improving the mental health of Black boys while challenging the negative stereotypes often associated with this demographic in the society. This is a happiness research-informed podcast themed on the 8 pillars of happiness explored on my research trip to the top 5 happiest countries in the world. Now, isn't that cool? So welcome back to the S.M.I.L.E-ing Boys Podcast. And as ever, I am your host, Kay Rufai, colorful and smiley as ever. And I'm back with another episode. So today's episode, as always, is following a theme from the 8 pillars of happiness, which is based upon the research that I've conducted. And today's pillar would be togetherness and belonging. How does this impact the mental well-being of us as people, as young people, and how does this navigate us towards happiness? So each pillar has various episodes. So today's episode would be exploring the concept of snitching. How does that impact the idea of togetherness and belonging? We're going to delve into that. Okay, before we start every episode, I always explore some of the research just to kind of give context to what we're going to kind of delve into much later. So that's the theme. And then we play you an audio clip and then we kind of get through the episode. So hope you've mastered that model now and it's not going to be a strange idea to you moving forward. Loneliness is bad for happiness. Obvious, right? A novel idea. More than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle pointed out that man is a social animal. And in the 1940s, Maslow's pyramid of human needs showed how love and belonging come just after basic safety and physiological needs. Who would have guessed that? The European Social Survey concluded through its reports that the more people we have with whom we could talk to about personal matters, the happier we are. I know that's quite a difficult point and strange thing to explore, especially in these times, as a result of the COVID and isolation and remote communication and what does togetherness and belonging look like in this context, right? We would explore that as well. So today, modern happiness research using big data echoes these findings. So working with these young people, I gave them certain prompts to explore who are the people they spend time with, what are the impacts of these friendships or unions, positive and negative, and kind of empower them to interrogate these ideas. And then we kind of delved much deeper into certain elements. And through those interrogation, the idea and theme of snitching came out. So I'm going to play you a clip. And then after that, we shall reconvene and explore and go deeper into the idea of snitching. Who would you never trust?
I put Takashi.
Takashi. That's 6ix9ine, yeah?
Yeah.
Why?
He's a snitch.
He's a snitch, okay.
Okay, so what does snitching mean? Can anyone tell me? When you say, if something happens, you're involved, you get caught for it, and then you bait them out. You tell on them to get yourself out of the situation. Okay, what if you don't do it to get yourself out of the situation? Is that still snitching? Just going out.
It is snitching. Actually, no, it's not because you didn't do it. So why are you going to take the blame?
Say, for example, I'm on the block, yeah, and I see some guy just G-check a guy and rob some guy, yeah, and then feds come and they ask me, did anyone see what happened? And then I say, because I know that kid that got G-check, I know his mom. And I go to her and say, I know who did that. It's that guy that lives kind of flat. He definitely G-check for something, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but that's it. Okay, so he's gonna get caught. But me seeing someone rob another person's son and maybe stab them and know that information, I'm a snitch. Because someone else that stabbed somebody is getting caught. Is that what we generally believe? If you saw, you can just not say anything, don't get yourself involved. But what you could have done, you've seen it happen. So he could just come and back me. He doesn't need to. So is it ever okay to be a snake? Yes. So what's really interesting is, for us
imagine that clip in itself must have been one that generated a lot of chuckles, a lot of, oh my gosh, it's so complicated. Who would have thought, right? And perhaps maybe some insights into how convoluted the idea of snitching is, as it inevitably sounded through the clip, just how tumultuous the journey was from young people thinking yes and no and maybe and gray area and blue area, and just exploring much deeper just this allegiance that we have to the snitches get stitches phrase. After that particular session with those young people, on my way back home, I was really ruminating and thinking, as I was during the session, and really provoking their thought processes with various questions, and for me, it's so interesting making the link and the connection between trust and togetherness, but also more specifically in this context, trust and snitching. Because if you think back to the first episode where I explored trust, is the idea of the institutions that are meant to safeguard us and keep us safe, the individuals within these institutions in our everyday lives, that it's their role to keep us safe and to make us, safeguarded. If there is a lack of trust in this particular relationship, then how can we openly and confidently give out information knowing this information would not be used against us? We would not eventually somehow be roped into this, and actually more impacting, how do we know that this information is not going to consistently fulfill a particular agenda that already is in place to incarcerate and to separate much more men, black men, people of color, into institutions where then their rights do not belong to them. So when we kind of predicate this conversation on that and realize that that's where this idea of distrust has led to this false allegiance, when we think about how we connect to the term snitching. I've always been, through various media growing up, through music, films, plays, whatever, been exposed to the context of which you are never allowed to snitch under no circumstance, because all the popular media that I've consumed through movies and all these other forms have always reinforced the same narrative. Whoever it is, in any other circumstance, whatever the circumstance is, that opens their mouth to say that somebody else did something, that person gets penalized, punished, repudiated. All these various ways of affirming the same idea that you keep your mouth shut if you see, witness, hear anything that's untoward. So understanding that, we know we have a lot to battle with, because this is a long-standing reinforced narrative that we have been fed for reasons aforementioned earlier. So then I present this conversation to the young people, because one of them mentioned this famous rapper Tekashi 6ix9ine, and how obviously he's public incarceration, and the furore around that was something that people were able to kind of chime into and say, oh yeah, it's snitching and this, no one should snitch and all of that, which obviously young people were involved in all of this kind of media presentation of his life and his narrative. So all of them, was like, nah, I can never trust someone like him because he's snitching, And then we obviously delve much further into the idea of, in what circumstance is it ever okay to snitch or not to snitch? Because then I posed personal questions to them about, if I saw something happen to your friend or to you, and I said, oh, I knew who did it, but I'm not going to snitch. And they was like, oh, no, you're a snake to me. But then if I told you who did it, or I told, the law enforcement, and that person gets penalized and, reprimanded for their crimes, you be okay with that because it's against you. So it's really trying to dismantle this idea that, snitches get snitches is a rule that should be abided all the time, because there is a problem in that. And that's ultimately when we think about the situation that's affecting a lot of young people in our current way of life in the streets, especially young black kids. As we know, there's been over the past 2 years an increase in youth violence and serious youth crime. And this idea that some people know about that, some people witness this, some people see this, some people hear about this, but a lot of these crimes still go unsolved. And, the victims, parents, the family, all of these people, are still left with this wound because they are not able to see justice as well. And that's an interesting part to really kind of explore, because I start to speak about that with the young people and thinking about, if something happened to you and I witnessed that and I chose not to come forward, how does that feel to you, your family, your community at large? And really kind of getting them to disentangle this idea of snitching as a code that we abide by. Because that's one thing I start to think about the powers that be and the male role models, or people who fill these voids that inevitably, most men have when it comes to searching for identity. We look at people who ultimately model an idea that looks appealing to us. And most of the time, it's not always people that are positive, especially if there is a void of father figure in our household, which inevitably there are quite a few, especially within this demographic. The stronghold that exists within that relationship is based upon false ideas of loyalty. So therefore, the kid is being kicked out of school and they told you not this, and there's this angst and this distrust with the society, institution, and then this person is like, yo, man, you're a smart kid, bro. I see what you do. You're really blah, blah, blah. You know what? Can you do this for me? But don't let no one know, because, those people, they don't even want to hear from you. They don't even rate what you have to say. And all of a sudden, that allegiance, that trust is then used to kind of model this very dangerous idea of togetherness and bonding. And then you reserve all your loyalty to that person. And when they do things that you probably know in the depths of your heart and your soul are not positive, you still keep your tongue tied and never say nothing. And that's something that, is a dangerous idea when we start to look at what happens on the streets and in the lives of young people. And I know very personally, working with different young people, where these situations are really live in their existence. I know about what they know and the fear that surrounds that information or that knowledge, and how they would, swear never to give up that information, even though they know the kind of things that could do for the family or the victims or those kinds of people, or even in their own personal lives, who they're trying to take the rap for, just because of this idea of loyalty and snitching. So that's just something I just wanted to explore, especially around the idea of young people and masculinity, how, there are these loopholes that are being capitalized on when we think about coercion and manipulation of young people and young boys particularly. And that's something to really start to think about, how we can interject this, how we can also play a part in our own everyday lives and actually working on helping change this narrative, because again, a lot of us create art forms like music and films where, these narratives are still perpetuated without the nuance, without exploring, this idea of at what point is this problematic, because one thing that's really interesting around this when I was talking to the young people is, when it became personal, their thought processes changed. But when it was much more of a broader thing, they was like, never, no, and I start to think about how we were raised. Me personally, I can think about that. And that's a role I think parents and people who are caregivers and guardians could really think about more about. Because what it really does is, the question is, where are we modeled this idea that being honest and speaking on what we have done or what we have seen happen is always reprimanded negatively? I mean, when we think about that, we think about our upbringing. Most of us, me personally, I could say, if I did something wrong or I spoke about somebody that did something wrong, they were always punished to the nth degree. So there was nothing about, you speak the truth, your punishment will be different because at least you were honest, right? There was never really any of that. There was not even really any discussions to be quite honest, So I was never even really clearly sure about why and what the punishment was for. I mean, I knew I did stupid things, but never really knew the real depths of why the punishment was for that thing and what were the learnings in that, And that's the interesting thing to think about when we start to look at our relationship with how we raise young people, because it's important to reprimand and it's important to have consequences to actions, but actually the idea of honesty is something that needs to be rewarded, because then if young people are growing into a world that actually values honesty, so therefore when they do something wrong and they say, yeah, I did it, but blah blah blah, so then this idea that whoever it is that is responsible for that young person could say, you know what, that honesty was really valuable, that's incredible, but you're still going to have 3 days grounded, but instead of 5 you get 3 days and write an essay about why blah 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 or whatever, so they can start to see that actually honesty pays. Because when we look at our society, we look at the politicians, we look at our government, this system is predicated upon dishonesty. We know about all the campaigns that were run, that were given false information, really, really inaccurate narratives that were used to push particular agenda. But these people still get rewarded for it because, everyone else goes and votes for these things based on lies. So therefore, the society we live in also is one to really critique and to question how much of that really impacts the way that we are told by these informations that we are exposed to in our society, that actually if you tell the truth, you're a punk. And actually nothing positive comes out of it. But if you tell lies, then you progress and you proceed in society, and patriarchy rewards you and all these other things. So for me, it was important to deconstruct that in that conversation and that thought process, to really think of how deeply rooted this idea is, not just for the young people, but for us in the world that we navigate. So then, that brings us to the idea of how can real togetherness and belonging really be nurtured, especially in this time of social distancing and isolation. And that's a very difficult one. I don't have the answers, but I think collectively, a lot of nuggets can really come through. But what's really important and what is a baseline is that connection needs to exist. How do we connect? How do we stay connected in this time? Especially for young people, because a lot of people talk about, we need to do stuff online for young people, but never really exploring the fine details, the nuances of some young people don't have data on their phones. So everyone talking about Zoom or having FaceTime. Some people still don't have data. Some people can't afford that. Some young people don't have the privacy in their homes to be able to have a FaceTime or some sort of Zoom or even the appliances to do that. So really trying to think about how can we still nurture this feeling of togetherness and belonging, because we all need that, as highlighted in the previous excerpt around. After physiological needs and comes togetherness, after love and physiological needs, we want to be able to feel togetherness and belong in somewhere. And that's obviously the idea that becomes hooked upon when we think about those who coerce young people. So for me, I think what's really important to just kind of try and think about, and I guess inspire us to think about, is what things can we do in our own everyday lives to start to foster more positive togetherness and foster more healthy belonging within ourselves, but also towards nurturing the young people that are coming in the generation right now. Again, as I said, just fostering a spirit of honesty and a community of honesty where that's being rewarded positively. I think that's the first thing in our relationships and our friendship, and the way teachers reprimand young people and reward them for honesty, and to actually, when it comes to parenting, really sitting a young person down and really getting them to ask and interrogate, why do they think they're getting a much more favorable punishment, and get them to understand that it's due to the honesty that you reward that much more than, trying to evade the truth because you think you're going to get a much more favorable punishment or escape punishment altogether. Another thing is, just working on trust building, being honest with them, with ourselves, with each other, with strangers, and seeing how that hopefully inspires other people to be honest and to build trust with us too. Another thing is, I guess just on an institutional level, trying to negate all the structures that already are in place that force young people, specifically this demographic of young black boys, to actually resort to the idea of never telling the truth, because if they do tell the truth, people don't believe them anyway. So they think, well, why would I tell you this? Because you already have this assumption and perception of me. So that's also something that's important to deconstruct and to really start to challenge if we are in those institutions. As a male, black male in this instance, it's important for us to take away what we have been force fed, through all this media, and actually what are we doing actively to really deconstruct that towards the consumption that the young people that we inevitably exposing this stuff to, how are we deconstructing what our role is in that too, really trying to, I guess, challenge each other to really start to think about what kind of model of loyalty do we put out there, what type of model of togetherness and belonging do we put out there. And that's one of the biggest things that happen when we think about gang culture, because it's basically predicated upon loyalty and sense of identity and togetherness and belonging and all these themes. So that's why it's such a very powerful pillar when we think about happiness. And a lot of the young people that I work with, some in prison, some in similar institutions like YOIs and things like that, majority of those young people, they're in there, not majority, but there's quite a handful of those who are in there for crimes which they perhaps didn't commit, but because they're taking a rap for somebody, an older, who's out there, who's like, make sure you don't snitch on man, make sure you don't rat on man, and all of these other things. And it's quite heartbreaking, because this is a model that we have created as a society, as a culture, and it's affirmed jokingly in lots of mediums, through films and plays and music and all these things. And it's quite detrimental, could be really quite detrimental to a lot of families, to a lot of individuals, and to a lot of communities. And it's important that we start to deconstruct and challenge that, especially when we kind of model this idea of real togetherness and belonging to young people, especially young black boys. So those are my kind of outtakes from this, and hopefully we can kind of explore how this pertains to us personally, and also in the grand scheme of the societal picture. So thank you for joining me today on the S.M.I.L.E.ing Boys Podcast. So hopefully you've taken something away that you can enact in your own personal life, or you have broadened your understanding and your insight around how to take away these concepts and be mindful of how that impacts other people in the world that we live in, and what tiny part you might be able to play in trying to negate and challenge the way this interplays in the lives of other people, especially young boys. I look forward to catching you guys on the next episode, but just before that, make sure you subscribe, make sure you post this, make sure you like, make sure you comment, make sure you rate it. If you want to check out more things that I do, there are going to be so many links in the description. You could check out the Guardian interview that explores some of the work that I've done with young boys. If you want to reach out to me to come into your school to deliver the S.M.I.L.E.ing Boys project, definitely do that. Available for a lot of public speaking events, post COVID, or even obviously through various innovative digital platforms, we can always make that work and make that happen. So yeah, just get in touch if you want to discuss, pontificate, all these other ways in which people want to share their ideas. Please link up and let's do that. Catch you guys on the next episode. Much peace and love.